Today we are going to look at this one here, the ZP1 from the coffee brand WPM. Or actually the brand is also sometimes called Home Pro, which makes the WPM acronym slightly out of tune, because shouldn't it be WHP? Well, anyway, it's a Hong Kong based brand and they already have a few espresso machines and grinders on the market, but I think actually they are more famous worldwide for their milk pitchers, where they really have a lot of different models that seemed aimed at latte artists. But now, after spending around 5 weeks with this model here, I think it's pretty clear that this brand is actually to be taken seriously for their grinders. The ZP1 is a very cool grinder with some really innovative new features, but I'm also a little bit conflicted about the grinder as a whole. So in this review, I'll cover the good and the bad and also the slightly questionable things, because there are a couple of weird decisions in this otherwise serious and well-built grinder. So let's dive into it. The first thing you notice when you unbox the grinder is its leaning tower of Pisa look, similar to the Optiono P64, which kind of pioneered that design. It was later copied by the DF64. And now it feels like it's become quite common. However, the ZP1 has a slight variation to this design, making it look a little bit more like an air traffic control tower. Maybe the air traffic control tower of Pisa. I don't know if that's a thing. Whether you like it or not, that's probably a matter of personal preference, but it is pretty striking with this kind of big head. It almost looks like a DF64 that is wearing a hat. Another thing that is striking is the quality of the components. It gives a very positive impression. It's a heavy grinder, around 8 kilos, and just super well built. All the parts seem to be well thought out. For instance, this magnetic catch cup just slides in very nice. The adjustment dial is ultra smooth and it's quite nice to touch. It has this rubber surface here that makes it very easy to grip. The RPM dial on the side is also nice to use. Nothing special here, and the on and off button, and that's something that many other grinders overlook. They will somehow have less than optimal on and off buttons, but this one here is also just nice to touch and it turns the grinder on and off. Probably the best feature of this grinder is the easy access to the burrs. So you just twist it off like so, and now you have full access to the burr chamber. You can clean it out or you can swap the burrs. So I haven't actually seen many grinders that have this fast access to the burrs. Perhaps the only exception is this one here, the mixed cool areas behind me, which also has very quick burr release. So this is a really cool feature that I'm very excited about. Another nice touch, the magnetic chute here on the front is also very easy to remove, and then you can get in and clean out here with the declumper. And actually it also has another cool feature here. It has this little clicker here that will help to release any fines that are stuck. But it works fine, but not 100% perfect. But let's save that for a little bit later. So there's a little bit of a cliffhanger here. The grinder comes with a set of 64mm burrs from a brand called Kerber. Well, actually not completely 64mm burrs. They are more like 63.8mm. And this brand also produces burrs for other manufacturers. While the burrs perform pretty good, they're not extraordinary. When you look at the geometry, you can tell they resemble many other espresso grinders out there. I think they are quite similar to that classic Italian espresso flavor profile and also look that way. Kind of similar to what's used in the Eureka line of grinders. I did use these burrs for the first few days of testing, and while they're fine, I think if you're buying a grinder in this price range, sooner or later you'll probably want to swap them out for something else. So most of my testing has been with other burrs. Now let's see how the grinder performs, and then we can dive into the more nitty-gritty details. So I've measured out 3 doses each of 16 grams, and then we'll just grind them. We'll see how much retention there is, how noisy the grinder is, and if there are any quirks that you should be aware of. Okay, so I put 15 grams in. Now I'm having 14.4 grams out. And let me just try using this little trick here. And now the scale is between 14.8 and 14.9. It's kind of fluctuating a little bit. Pretty consistent with what I've seen in daily life. Let's do one more dose. 14.5 out. Let's try this trick. And now 14.9. Okay, last dose. Let's see if it's the same. 14.6 out this time. And let's do a little. And now we got 14.9 out again. So this is actually super typical of what I've been experiencing in daily life. There is a little bit of retention if you're just using this knocker here. If you go in and beat it a little bit on top, then you'll get the last, let's say 0.2, 0.3 grams out that you are probably missing. And then it's getting very close to zero retention, but not quite there. Cool thing is we can also open the Burr chamber here, and then we can see how much is stuck there. And it actually looks very neat, just a few little drops here and there. The most common situation is that the retention is here around the declumper. Actually, there's an ionizer inside the unit, but I think it's not working that great, or perhaps that declumper design could be a little bit smarter made, because it's a little bit of a shame when you got all these other cool things done to minimize retention. You do, of course, also have the option to use these bellows. I think you have to buy them as an extra add-on for something like 25 euros, and then you can just use it on top here. And now you can really get out all retention because these bellows are super efficient. But personally, I don't really like it because you have to push quite forcefully. And I feel like if the grinder looked a bit odd before, now it looks like it's wearing some kind of weird hat as well. And I just don't love that feeling. When I've been using it, I also feel like you get more of a fines collection here around the whole chute. So in daily use, I would probably prefer just to give it a little push on the top. A few other things to note. The grinder is very quiet with a pleasant pitch. Probably one of the nicest I've been testing all year. The dial indicator, also super nice to use. It's big, it's got numbers and subdivisions between each number, which makes it very easy to make small adjustments. But that being said, I feel like each step in the espresso section is enough to move the shot quite a bit. Probably around 4 seconds, just with one subdivision. So here, I think some people would probably prefer a bit more granularity. But I don't quite understand why it is. Maybe it's with the Burrs I've been using, because you have espresso setting around 3 and then drip coffee around 20. So there should be quite a wide range. So I don't quite understand why it's not more granular. But I think if you're already into the single dosing lifestyle, the granularity of each step is enough. And then you can adjust it with a little bit of change in dose between the setting. Or you can even go between settings because it is a stepless grinder. The calibration mechanism is extremely nice and shows how much thought the WPM has put into the grinder. You simply remove the Burr carrier, lift out the adjustment ring, and then you set the 0 point. It's super easy and all very smooth. As for the RPM, it's a little bit difficult to see exactly which setting you're on, and that's where a setup like the one on GF64V, where you have a little display, has an advantage. On this grinder, it's a bit off to the side, and it can be a little bit difficult to see where you're at. Personally, I don't mind too much because I'll mostly be using the grinder either on the fastest setting for espresso or on the lowest setting if I'm doing some kind of filter coffee method where I want more clarity and where that lower RPM can help to diminish the amount of fines a little bit. That being said, it's nice that the RPM function is included, as we are seeing this feature on more grinders nowadays. Now let's get to the downsides. During my testing, the grinder has worked well for espresso. The workflow has been nice, but then I installed a set of filter burrs recently from the grinder brand BREW. While the performance was fine, I did notice I had better flavor clarity with the same burrs in a different grinder, that I had a vertical burr orientation instead of this pancake burr design here. Here you have 2 burrs on top of each other, and then there is another type of grinder where the burrs sit like this, and then they are fed via an auger. And this is something that people have been discussing more over the last year, which burr design is actually better. And while I find the difference is not massive, especially for filter coffee, I find certain burrs just perform better, give more clarity with that auger-fed design. And that's also been the case for me when I compared the DF83 and the DF83V I did prefer that auger-fed design, especially for drip coffee. Now onto the more kind of questionable decisions of this grinder. It comes with not one but two set of burr carriers. And you might think it's great to have more options for different burrs, and in theory it is. But when I tried to install some SSP burrs, I realized that the holes didn't fit the stock burr carrier. And it turns out that WPM stock burrs have an odd hole position because the burrs are actually a slightly smaller size compared to the standard 64mm burrs you typically see from other manufacturers. If you want to install different burrs in this grinder, you'll likely have to install a new burr carrier, which isn't difficult, but it requires a special tool, 10mm hex socket, which is a bit annoying. The top burr carrier has 6 holes to accommodate various burrs, but it's just the bottom carrier where you have to swap it out to a different design. Also, the tolerances of that extra burr carrier is very tight. So if you have a set of burrs that are not exactly 64mm, for instance my SSP multi-purpose are 64mm 0.2, then they won't fit here inside these wings. So in a grinder like this, where upgradability to different burrs, especially SSP burrs, is probably a big selling point for many people, this is a little bit disappointing. I think the brand could easily address this by selling the grinder with the other burr carrier installed. Actually, I think you can pre-order it with different burrs, SSP burrs as well. And I guess in that case they will ship it with a different burr carrier. But I think it should just be standard. The anti-static situation and retention could also be improved slightly. Even though they've clearly put a lot of thought and effort into this part of the design, it's not noticeably better than the competition. So overall, the ZP1 is a very good grinder for espresso. For filter coffee, it wouldn't be my top recommendation, as there are cheaper grinders that perform better for that type of brewing. However, for espresso, if you like the features, it's a solid choice. That being said, as we've discussed on this channel before, it's not really the grinder itself that produces the flavors, it's more the burrs inside it. So would the same burrs in a different grinder perform just as well? For example, if you put them in the DF64, which is about half the price, would it be just as good? I would say yes, there probably wouldn't be much difference. So what you're really paying for is that nicer build quality, slightly smoother workflow. It's very quiet, and you also have that very easy access to the burrs. But is that worth an extra $300, $400, $500 depending on where you live? I think that's a tougher question, and it really depends on what you value. In this price range, you're also getting into a different territory. You have competition like DF83V with those bigger 83mm burrs. And while it may not be as polished as a product, those 83mm burrs are just going to be a lot faster, and it will also offer a little bit more in terms of all-around performance for both espresso and filter coffee. At this price point, there are just so many great options that it's hard to say there's a right or wrong choice. What is certain though is that the ZP1 is a well-made grinder, and WPM is a brand to keep an eye on. If you're still unsure about this whole grinder market and all these fancy new features, then I do have a big grinder overview video where I go through how I would make a decision in 2024 if I were to buy a new grinder. So I'll put a link to that video right here, and then you can just click it, and then I'll see you over there.